You talked about the 8 million Black babies in this country right now. We got serious conversations that need to be ongoing about how are we going to shore up the educational bag for our kids, because public school systems is a wrap. It's a wrap. So, and the cavalry is not
What do you mean? What do you mean about the it's a wrap?
What I mean by that is that for a second time in United States history since the Civil War, these United States at the federal level have decided to abdicate its responsibility to deliver a fair and equitable education system as a public good and a right to all American children. This happened the first time during the fall of after the fall of Reconstruction, okay? When the Freedmen's Bureau fell, when the Freedmen's school system was wiped away, okay? And when the federal government said we will allow states to choose how they deal with their Black citizens, that was the first time. The second time was when this occupier came into office for his second regime and immediately dismantled the Department of Education, which is unraveling before our eyes. This, again, abdication. So that's what I mean by it's a wrap for the public school system. There's no more looking to the federal government to enforce some semblance of equity or to at least have an apparatus to be able to assert one's rights.
It is Freedom Friday and you are still not free.
Welcome to another episode of Freedom Friday. It is Friday and you are still not free, but hopefully you will be freer after this hour with the gang and me. And today we have a very special guest, Dr. Karida Brown, who's the author of The Battle for the Black Mind. It is a book that has a title that instantly lets me know that we're serious. It instantly lets me know. We talk about education a lot on this show. We talk about what we're going to do for the 8 million Black children. And every week we find a different way to say the same thing, which is that they are being robbed of their brilliance and that it's not by accident. It is literally structural, systematic, operational, whatever word you want to use to say that is not left up to happenstance, that the great robbery of the Black mind takes place in classrooms, but not just in classrooms, not just in schools, in every area of life activity, in the media, in schools and law and commerce and education, wherever you are, there is a part of the puzzle of the robbery, the great theft of Black children. Dr. Brown, thank you so much for joining us today. I know we're interrupting your summer of reflection in a good place in the United States for Black folk, but that you would come on today. Very appreciative. So thank you for coming on.
It is truly a joy and an honor to be here. I've looked forward to this, so it's a welcome. I won't even call it an interruption. I'm here in Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts, which is my happy place. I usually spend a summer of solitude here, but I can think of nothing more important and joyous than spending this time with you.
Well, great. Let's kick it off, though. You wrote this book. I love when my people write books. I love to support them and tell everybody, go buy this book. I'm telling you, here's my plug right now. Everybody, go buy The Battle for the Black Mind. There you go. That's it. When our people write books, we buy books. So that's what we do. The Battle for the Black Mind, the title is provocative. Tell me, what was the aim of your book and what's the story you want to tell with this work?
You know, they say a mind is a terrible thing to waste. Well, for so many, the Black mind was a matter of national security. I love this framing that you all use about the robbery of Black minds. And I think so I'm an 80s baby, so I grew up during 90s hip hop. I immediately think of Biggie Smalls' Give Me the Loot. And it is the greatest heist that we have ever seen. This idea that, you know, the question of not only what kind of education Black folks should be able and allowed to access in this country, but whether or not they should have it at all was a question that was on the table for a really long time after emancipation. So if we remember that it was illegal for Black people, free or enslaved, to be able to learn to read or write, to gather, to educate themselves in many Southern states during slavery. Okay, there was an understanding by the powers that be, or the putative powers that be, that education is power. If knowledge is power, and we can agree to that, that was the one thing that white America wanted to make sure that Black people did not have access to. And if they did have access to it, they really wanted to put a governor on that, to make sure to um, confine the types of education that Black people could access, so it would be a utility for white industrialist needs. So in Battle for the Black Mind, I tell that story. And I intentionally title the book as a battle. I don't just call it the history of Black education or the history of Black teaching and schooling. It was a battleground because what I learned from my 8 years of research for this book is
Wow. Did
that
you say 8 years? It took 8 years?
8 years, 8 years, I look real different when I started this book. Okay.
Wow.
I'm still cute now, but it's almost a decade. Um, what I found through my research, deep archival research into the not just the landscape of Black schools that emerged after the Civil War, I really wanted to know, what was a colored school? Why did the United States decide off the rip that there should be Black schools and white schools? Because it could have made the decision, okay, to just say, okay, we're going to build a public school system for all kids. That was an intentional decision to racially segregate the school system. And in my mind, I said, okay, well, then there must have been a different educational philosophy that undergirded those schools. There must have been a different curricula. And I wanted to know what those architects of Black education had in mind. What did white architects of Black education have in mind for Black schools? But also, what did the 4 million at the time newly freed African Americans have in mind for their education? And how was education a part of our long freedom struggle? So that's what the Battle for the Black Mind sets up. It shows how, even amongst Black Americans, we even battled with each other over these questions. And it also shows how, through it all, African Americans took their educational visions in their own hands, built their own institutions, designed their own curricula, and made sure that Black minds stayed nourished.
Mm-hmm. There's so much in there. So there's two areas that, two roads we could take with that part. The white architects of education, and there's a book I remember called The White Architects of Black Education. That's a deep story.
Shout out to Dr. William D. Watkins. May he rest in peace, for writing that dope book.
Very, very, like, if you've never sat down and thought about where all this stuff with education comes from, when you start digging into it, it gets real deep, real quick. And then there's the second part of the story is the more important part, which is, what did we do about it? Right? Like, so when we start with the first one, what's really important for people to know about the architects and what they saw for us that we did not see for ourselves?
Okay, so I want you to know that this was a varied landscape. So you've got white power brokers who have different interests in Black education. You've got the white South, who, for the majority, didn't want Black folks to have any education at all. But what's important to also know about that is, did you know that after the Civil War, there was no public school system for Black or white children in the South?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
None. So their kids wasn't even getting it. But so they were fine with their kids not getting it, but especially didn't want Black kids having access to public education. So that's one interest group. But you also had a, a deluge of missionaries who came in from the North right after the Civil War, wanting to bring their skills and resources to come rebuild the United States, reunite this country. And many of those missionaries were teachers. Many of them were white. And they had an interest in providing a Christian education to Black schools. So when you think about like freedmen schools, they were led by Black and white teachers, but you saw a lot of white Northerners come wanting to spread a religious education there. And then you got the interest group that I focus on a lot in this book, and that is white industrialists. That is your billionaires. That's your Rockefellers, your Carnegies, your Robert Ogdens, and storied American families who built tremendous wealth during the Gilded Age, started philanthropic organizations in their own name, image, and likeness, and had grand visions for how they were going to take over this country. And one thing that they were supremely interested in was this labor force that they saw that lay in wait in the South. African Americans who could be an endless supply of cheap labor. Why? Because the meat packing factories needed packers. Those railroads needed people to build them. Those manufacturing plants needed cheap labor to work around the clock during the Industrial Revolution. And the idea was, for these billionaires, why are we going to Europe to supply a cheap labor force when we can just tap into this? But we need a labor force that is what? Docile. We need a labor force that is not going to be trying to join unions and advocate for their rights and, drive up our prices and dig into our profits. So they invested heavily in the Black education system in the South to cultivate a curricula to socialize African Americans for a job of labor, to do and not think. This was called the industrial model of Black education. This curricula was pushed in many of our HBCUs at their founding. They were also pushed through elementary schools through the South and funded heavily, again, by these billionaires. Why? Because the white South would not allocate tax dollars to Black public schools.
Brings us okay. So that's an elegant setup for, and I know my homies on the podcast here are, they're not going to be with me on this one, but that brings us right to the doorstep of Booker T. Washington.
Oh.
That brings us right because you said I don't think everybody knows the origin of HBCUs. I don't think we have a very, I think we have a very right now view of it, but we don't have the originalist view. We don't go all the way back to the beginning and see that they're even named after some people that are not us, right? Like, I don't think everybody knows the beginning and the origins, but is this a story of how things, I don't know how else to put this, but the devil sometimes creates things for his own purpose and doesn't realize what God's going to do. So like, it's whatever you started for, we're going to turn it into something different, right? Like, you have segregated us into schools. I'll give one quick example that my boys here have heard me say a million times. Crispus Addicts in Indianapolis is a school in which the white citizens councils pulled Black people out of all the surrounding schools and put them into one school so that they would be segregated and they wouldn't be in other schools. What they didn't know was going to happen was at that time, Black PhD teachers could not get college jobs. So all the teachers in that high school were going to be PhD level Black teachers. And what happened was, you thought you were doing something ugly by segregating those people, but what happened was they ended up outpacing you. That school ended up outperforming all the white schools in the area, started producing congressmen and mayors and famous musicians and famous athletes and whatever. So you started that school out of something ugly. But what happened was, so it's the same thing with HBCUs kind of. It's like they have this story. Let me just talk a little bit about there. We could talk about Booker T. We could talk about the origins of the architects with HBCUs and what they became. How about that? And brothers, jump in. Don't, I got so many questions. I could ask a million questions.
Listen, no, this is great. I mean, a fantastic setup. And I would say let's start with HBCUs because I think that's, I'm glad, people recognize like the impact they have, today. But, back in the day, we know Dr. Carter G. Woodson kind of got booted out of Howard University, right? The Mecca, you know what I mean? So like, just those conflicts of like, no, here's what self-determination can be, but it can't be on this HBCU, that kind of, that kind of thing. So
I'm gonna start with the point, and the point is 4 words. Won't he do it?
mm-hmm.
And I think that summarizes your story, Chris, and that is the a point that I want to make about HBCUs when I talk about the origin story. So in Battle for the Black Mind, I use a few of our, most acclaimed HBCUs as kind of characters in the book to tell the origin stories of the institutions and the first founders/presidents. So, many of us, it becomes lost on us that most HBCUs were founded by white men. You mentioned even some of them named after white men, including Howard.
Howard, yeah,
Including
General Howard, yeah.
Including Dillard, right? And when you go on HBCU campuses, you will see the names of the buildings are mostly named after these white men. What does that mean? That allowed an entry point to talk about their mindsets, their intentions, and their educational aims for Black children in higher education when these institutions were founded. And I want you to keep in mind that industrial model of Black education was the curricula. That was the, golden ticket that many of these white founders, they were trying to implement and institutionalize across the board throughout the South. So one of the most iconic institutions, sibling institutions that modeled this were Hampton Institute and Tuskegee. And they were really thought about as like sister institutes. Booker T. Washington is at the time, was the most acclaimed alumni of Hampton. He is the protege of the president/founder of Hampton Institute, Samuel Chapman Armstrong. Booker T. Washington embodied this industrial education model. Okay. He lived it. He was its poster child. Okay. And he was a master orator. So when he gets his appointment as president of Tuskegee Institute, an appointment that Samuel Chapman Armstrong hand delivers him, the intention was to create an HBCU led by an African American that was modeled after this industrial education curricula. Why was that so important? Because Armstrong and his ilk, we call them the Tuskegee machine, very much understood that to pull off this heist, I like that word heist, to pull off this heist to get Black folks to buy in to this idea of do not think industrial education, we really need Black people at the helm of leadership to promote this idea, to socialize it amongst the folks. So Booker T. Washington becomes a leader in a very particular way. He's picked and chosen to do that. So, but you have many, many institutions, HBCUs and otherwise, that begin to follow this model. And that's not to say that we did not accomplish the wholly impossible through our HBCUs. We know the story that African Americans made those institutions into ones that were for us, by us, and about us. But it's important to understand the battleground, the intentions around their fighting, so we understand what we fought for to get what we have now. So it's a complicated story. I'm happy to talk more about that, but it's important to understand the different models of education. Today, we would call it school choice that was available to Black folks back then. You had schools that were founded on a liberal model. Atlanta University, that's now Clark Atlanta University. Spelman College, also founded by a Rockefeller, Laura Spelman Rockefeller.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You had institutions that.
I don't think people know that name.
Okay. So you have
all Spelman graduates. Do you know where they came from?
And you walk into the main building on their campus. I'll forget the name of that building. There is a plaque with that white woman's face, name, and, her insignia on it. And it's okay to interrogate these origin stories. And it's okay if the story doesn't align with what you know your institution to be now. I think that as Black folks, that makes me even more proud of what we've done, but we can't look away at history just because we don't like it. Okay?
Yeah. So I'm going to give my.
He's like, look away, look away, look away
Yeah.
now.
Don't look up. Don't look up. I'm going to give my quick, I think, rescue of the industrial Booker T thing.
Okay.
Right? Let me give my quick rescue of it. First of all, let me just tell a very quick story. I got to stay at one of the houses that was one of the first houses. I think it was built for the president of Tuskegee in Richmond, Virginia. There was this house. Oh, I don't know, like it's so far out that it took me a very long time to get there. And I spent a night there. There's a tree there where there's a bench. And on that bench is where Dr. King wrote the I Have a Dream speech. He got to stay there. But when one of the descendants of Booker T came to give us a little talk about the house, because I think it's still in their possession. And it was interesting to me. I sat there. There was so much I didn't know, but every brick of that house was built by Black hands, the bricks themselves. At a time where brick making wasn't something that we did, it was something we bought. We bought bricks. Every piece of that house was designed by a Black architect that learned during this era, from these schools. And I think the radical self-sufficiency as the real goal, not the accommodationism, is the thing that we lose when we get into the accommodationist arguments about what was taking place at that time. There's a very, I think, radically simple idea at that time was industrial was the tech of the time. So today we're pushing kids to learn coding, and that bus is already gone. Like coding is old now. Now they're on to the next thing, AI. Well, with each thing that comes, we get left behind, and they get the first fruits of that technology, and we don't. So the idea that we put our own people on whatever is the tech of the day. At that time, industrial was the tech. Railroads and bricks and houses and building things for yourselves or whatever. And out of this Booker T thing comes this argument between him and Dubois, right?
Yeah.
And
Yes.
Dubois to me represents the Black elite, and Washington represents a focus on the Black masses. Not everybody's going to go to Harvard. Not everybody's going to be the first PhD out of Harvard, and not everybody is going to be part of the talented 10th. Not everybody is going to be the ones that vacation with what's the name of that book? People Like Us, or something.
Our kind of people.
Our kind of people, right? Like, so they had. I think if you look at them both, they cover all bases of us. Like we are in a continuum, and they cover the continuum. But the Black masses were the ones that were being left out of the boom. And and this idea that we could only work for somebody else, or we could build other people's stuff, but we couldn't build our own stuff, whatever, was one that I think, in some ways, I mean, Booker gets painted as like the Candace Owens of the times.
Oh, Lord.
He really does. He gets painted as like he was like the Clarence Thomas, Candace Owens of the time, which is a very crude and simplistic and flat version of what he was actually trying to accomplish. Because I think what he had was a very simple, practical idea, which was, unless you own your own things, unless you build and own your own things, you will always be working for somebody else. And you can talk all that stuff about, the Dubois stuff. And this is, I'm sure he had a radical they had back and forth there. You could do all that stuff that Dubois was talking about if you're Dubois, but you can't do it if you're part of the masses that don't have a job, don't have a place to be, don't have a school, don't have a building, don't have a church, you live in one of these rural counties where nothing resembles you, that you don't own anything, whatever. The idea that he built 5,500 schools across the American South in black areas where nobody was trying to have them have a building, a school, a teacher, that whole thing. So anyways, that's my little bit of a rescue, is just to say, I think they cover all the bases when you look at them together. Like when you combine them together, you get this spectrum of us that's more full, I think.
I love this. Can I jump in here, Chris?
No, don't jump in. This is your show, so you tell me. I'm trying to rescue the unrescuable here.
I
This
love
is
this.
what I do. So
And Sharif and Ish, jump in too, please. But I say in this book, I have a whole chapter called "Welcome to the Thunderdome," that is about this Du Bois and Washington beef, because it's important. It's important that we all know this as Black folks, and that we understand that the core of their beef was about Black education. It was about Black education, okay? So I start the chapter off by saying, before there was Kendrick and Drake, before Biggie and Tupac, before Jay-Z and Nas, Du Bois and Washington were the original diss tape. This is the first time on like a national scale that you have Black titans, iconic figures, come out and put all their business on the street and beat and fight it out. Okay, for all to see. Now, when we think about what a diss tape, what a beef is as a genre, what does it do? It's actually a form of political discourse, African American political discourse. The icons are beefing and they create a dichotomy around a set of ideas, but it opens up space for everyday folks to chime in, to critique it, to stretch it, to apply it to their own context. I don't know if y'all are hip hop fans, but every time Kendrick dropped a
I am
response to
Doc,
Drake,
but these two,
good.
they're not.
Yeah, I mean,
They're Milli Vanilli. They like Billy Vanilli.
oh, come on, man. I'm sitting there like analyzing the
he's
lines.
still trying to rescue Schoolie D after all these years. He's still trying to rescue Schoolie D as if Schoolie D was something. Stop it. Just stop
No.
Parkside 552.
it. Stop it.
Yes. So it's like it's a genre that allows for a new wind to come into a political discourse about a topic that affects all of us. When you think about Kendrick and Drake, yeah, they're coming at each other's necks, but what is it really about? It's about this beef between, is Black capitalism alone enough for us? Are we just commodifying and selling our gifts, genius, and talent to the highest bidder? Or is there something to be said about rooting our authenticity within community to make sure that it's coming back to us and that we are feeding the soul and ourselves and all of that? So those are the real political underpinnings of that beef. So you take it to Washington and Du Bois. Their disagreement came around this question of, they both had Black freedom dreams, and we end up in the same place: free, liberated, full of our own agency, self-actualized, equal. Okay, they all wanted those things. It was just a question of how we're going to get there. That's where these two titans departed. Booker T. Washington hung his hat publicly on this industrial education model. And where I have a stringent critique of that is, yes, he was doing a lot behind the scenes that was very effective. And even today, we can take heed from that. We don't need to be posting and telling folks everything that we're doing behind the scenes to get ourselves free. And he very much understood that. Why? Because unlike Du Bois, Washington is the only one of those 20th century leaders, from Du Bois, Ida B. Wells, Marcus Garvey, and many, many others, that grew up on a plantation. He was enslaved. He knows what that would look like. He understood that fat meat was greasy and what white America was capable of. So I think his political prowess came from a different place, and he rooted himself and his activism in the Jim Crow South. So they had to move a different way. Where my critique comes in is then what his public facing message was. And if you go and read the catalog of his speeches that he was giving in Madison Square Garden, all through churches in New York, Connecticut, to wealthy donors that he was raising money for his school from, that he was also championing to Black folks publicly. What was that message? That message was this radical self-sufficiency. It was about gaining skills and doubling down on the monopoly that Black Americans already had on agriculture, domestic service. He said, look, we can build wealth doing these things. I ain't got no problem with that. But what else did he say along with that? He said publicly over and over again, and y'all need to stop focusing on these voting rights and why y'all want all this equality and why y'all want equal citizenship. He wasn't talking about integration. He was talking about rights. So let me ask you this. How far is all your, building and architecture and 5,500 schools and the wealth that you're building, how are you going to protect that if you are not legally allowed to sue a white man in a court of law?
Mm-hmm.
In the South,
Mm-hmm.
you are not allowed to sit on a jury of your peers. You cannot vote for your local elected officials. You cannot enforce a contract. Okay? So if it could happen in Tulsa, do you hear me? Okay, if it could happen in Tulsa, there's a structural mismatch with that message that I bring a critique for what he was saying in the public eye and socializing Black folks to think that they could abdicate that fight for full rights to be able to protect that wealth that we built, to be able to protect that, all of that intergenerational growth that we were achieving. I know I'm getting long-winded, and I'll
Well,
say,
no. And actually, because this is good, because I want our
No,
audience
this
to
is
hear this
great.
one. Because
Yeah,
listen,
yeah. Don't apologize.
because this is what I want to say about that just
yeah,
quickly, which
please
is
do.
I don't hear anybody ever apply that stringent of a critique on Du Bois, who was very much an elitist who wanted to hang with white people.
Ooh,
Who very much actually was eating cucumber sandwiches up north.
He loves
Progressive
talking
Black
about
folks, the
cucumber
majority of them,
sandwiches.
the majority of Black folks were in the South. And you had these Negroes come from up north talking about, hey, let's eat some cucumber sandwiches with the white folks. And what people don't talk about is that in him doing that, he also had his agenda handed to him because the founding of the NAACP and others, they wanted to do some other things, but their white benefactors wanted them to focus on education too. And there's a sister, I'm going to forget her name right now, who wrote this great book about this a few years back about the origins of all that and who walked out of the rooms back then when the NAACP stuff was starting because they saw it for what it was about to be. They saw it as a vehicle for white philanthropists to impart a white liberal thumbprint on what they should be doing, tell them what to do. And there's Black folks that walked away from that table when he didn't. There's Black folks so he had the white benefit, but I never hear the stringent critique of his elitism, of his belief that voting will get us everywhere. Like people talk about Washington being a Black capitalist is the only thing. I just felt like he felt like if you don't own anything, you don't own anything. But on the other hand, you get to Du Bois, who really believes something today that people don't believe anymore, which is that voting is going to save us. There's people right now
Oh
who
man.
He didn't say that.
No,
He said
come on.
education. No. He said
Listen,
education. He didn't
I
say
will say
voting.
this. I'm
Voting's a
not
part
an
of it.
anti-voter. I will vote. I'm not an anti-voter. I just want to say this. But it is part of the Black discourse right now that the over-reliance and belief in the system and the voting system is not going to free us, right? Like I will vote. I just want, for the record, everybody, I am going to show up and I'm going to do my part. But I do know last year, even when there was an election, that you would talk to a lot of Black folks who would say to you, y'all preach this to us all the time, the stuff about voting and blah, 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 and my life doesn't change, whatever. I heard that a lot last year, right? I heard, like, as we were pushing, telling people this is the most consequential election in history. They were looking at us like we had three heads. Like, really? And then look what happens. We get the wrong,
Listen,
we get
I'm
the
not.
wrong
I
outcome.
need Ish to jump in. I'm not even finished my jet lag from leaving W.B. Du Bois' house in the Accra. I'm not even over my jet lag. It just landed to hear all of this madness. But Ish, you go ahead and jump in there.
I'm just saying, man, like the Bois lived for a very long time, and to confine him to that moment, and even just like the man went out of his way to speak for people and advocate for an education that was he viewed as a form of liberation, and to just like focus on like even like people talk about him in the Town the 10th. Like the critique you just laid out is a popular critique of Du Bois, and it's oversimplified of what Du Bois's growth was over time. He
It became
denounced the
his
Town
own
the 10th.
critique too. It
Yeah,
became his own
I mean, he grew. He had an arc.
Yeah.
Because you said he lived a long time. He lived long enough to have an arc. But some of that stuff that he had, if we're locating this argument in the time that him and Washington were beefing,
Thunderdome.
At that time, the Thunderdome time, he hadn't hit his arc yet, right? Just like King and Malcolm X had arcs too. They didn't end up where they started out. They actually ended up closer to each other after their arc as they learned some things about dealing with the same folks on different sides of the coin, right? Like they were dealing with the same folks, same thing back then. Now I do want to ask this too. In this, which one is great? I want to know which one is
Dr.
Drake.
Brown, this has
which
been pent up for a decade. This has been an ongoing conversation for a decade. So I'm so glad that
we are not glossing over this.
I want to know who's Drake though. Which one is Drake?
We will leave that for our audience to chime in on. And I love this because this is the point. These two titans, they have ascended into like they're symbolic. They're symbolic for two very strong currents of Black political thought that still run deep today. And these are the conversations that we need to be having. So I love this. This was, in fact, my intention. And I'm telling you, some of y'all gonna be real mad when you read my reading of Booker T and Washington in this book, because I let Booker T have it. And that is not
and everybody go get this book right now. Everybody buy this book. Once again, I got to put it there, buy it.
And I want y'all, as you read the book, to disagree. I want you to critique. I want you to fill in the blanks. Why? Because that is why I wrote it. I wrote it so that we would re-engage with, disagreement and constructive criticism, not just critique for critique's sake. That is how we grow. That's how we set our agenda. That's how we align. And also find areas where we're not going to align. This is how freedom dreams get on a vehicle and start going somewhere. This is how they turn into movements. So this is very important. May I say a few things about what you'd like to call the cucumber sandwich eating Du Bois? And if you
out of pocket. If
you notice my painting in the back, and I will out myself, I am a Du Boisian scholar. And what that means is
now I'm in trouble. You should have started with that. You should have started with that. How you gonna tell me that long after I done said my foolishness? How you gonna tell me that now?
So all I'm saying is, I know a few things about Du Bois. I might have written a couple books about Du Bois, but that doesn't mean that I have to godify Du Bois. That doesn't mean that he wasn't a human with lots of flaws. And I'm certainly happy to talk about those, but I want to make a few remarks, if I may. I want to echo Ish in that, yes, Du Bois lived a long life, 95 years, where you cannot elitism his story away when you recognize in the totality of his body of scholarship, organizing, and activism, you can't explain how this man not only dies in Accra, Ghana by choice, renounces his U.S. citizenship, and publicly joins the Communist Party of the USA. You can't then explain away that he didn't have an analysis of elitism and power lying in the masses. But to your point, Chris, that wasn't, if we're looking at the time where I'm talking about the battle for the Black mind, what tip was Du Bois on? And yes, the NAACP was a compromised organization from the start. Why? Because it was a multiracial organization that was founded primarily with white dollars and white ideas of what advancement looked like for colored people. Du Bois chose to stay on that board, but what was he doing before that? which was exactly during this time of the when the beef started with Booker T. Washington. He and 29 other Black men met in Niagara Falls and started the Niagara movement. They got together and said, we need a national organization for us, by us, and about us that's going to set a political, economic, and social agenda led by us. The Niagara movement fizzles out within 4 to 5 years. Why? Because they don't have the economic base. They are fighting all manner of, attack, including by Booker T. Washington. He did send his ops to Niagara to spy on the formation of that organization. And I've got the receipts to show. Sharif, I'll post these receipts on my LinkedIn too.
Oh yeah. And I think Dr. Anderson talks about that the ops movement in there too.
Yes. So you see him articulating his visions for Black freedom through many, many organizations, some that are compromised and problematic, and others that, are pro blackity, black, black, black. But with the NAACP, he had one interest. He wasn't really stunting what the rest of the organization was doing. He said, I want to be the editor-in-chief and director of the literary arm of this organization, the Crisis magazine. That was his lane. And he mandated, if he was going to agree to join this organization, I will have 100% literary control over this magazine. What did that do? It gave him a bullhorn, a mic to reach the Black masses. He left his job at Atlanta University stating that my social science, this idea that if I just prove to white people that racism is a fallacy, that there is no scientific, bases for racial difference, then that they will get it. He realized long ago in 1905, he's like, this ain't gonna work. And he leaves to go run the Crisis magazine. That and understanding that our liberation is going to be with the masses, he goes and gives this crazy speech at the Boulets, where he basically says, if left in y'all's hands, we will just be a bunch of Black capitalists where nothing comes back to our communities. I don't even know why you came and asked me to speak. So Du Bois had a very stringent critique of the Black elite. Why? Because he does come from that ilk. He definitely made a lot of moves throughout his life that, where I will say, yes, he put himself in what some might call compromised situations, but oftentimes you'll see him creating his own space within those. So the Crisis is just one of many examples of that, the most circulated Black publication during his time. So back to the argument around industrial education and liberal education, what Du Bois was so vehement about when it came to his beef with Booker T. Washington was that, are we citizens or not? And if we are citizens, we need it all right now. There is no way that we are going to gradually get these things. And the demand must be equality now, access now, because the longer that we wait and wait for white folks to give us permission to have those things, it's never going to happen. And what Booker T. Washington is promoting is in fact dangerous to the realization of that necessary outcome, which is we need the vote. We need the law to be able to enact and protect our freedoms. That was and also with liberal education, he's like, why should my kids be subject to a completely different curricula than every other American kid? You're already creating a tiered system. You're already creating a second-class educational system. So his argument was, yes, industrial education for Black and white children, And yes, liberal arts education for Black and white children. American children should be able to access an education that is suitable to their desires and ability. That's the tip he was on. And schools should be, he said this in an essay that's actually in an edited volume with Booker T. Washington. So did you know that throughout their lives, they often wrote together? They wrote essays making these arguments together. And in this one particular,
Chris and Ian in Ian Rowe. That's that
Don't
verse.
even try it. Don't even try it, bro. Don't even try it. Don't even try it. Right? Like, because I want to say this about the binary that we get lost in sometimes. Sometimes we get lost in choosing a hero on one side of the fence, and the other one becomes terrible, and yours becomes great. And we do this with the Garveyites. We do it with Malcolm and Martin. We do it over and over again. The Panthers and SNCC and NAACP. We find a way to put people in a binary. And we don't realize that we are the heirs and the owners of the totality of all of what they did. They're all actually like a library of Black thought. And when we start taking certain books and banning certain books out of the library of Black thought, we do ourselves like great harm, because there's a lot that I could disagree with on both. Like, there was a long period of time where I was very critical of Dr. King, right? It took me a long time to come around on stop. I saw him as very much an accommodationist and incrementalist. Someone who, I guess incrementalist is the best way I could put it. That used to bother me a lot about him. But the more I dug into his story, whatever, I found out that I was just kind of absorbing the wrong critique of him, I think, in some ways, right? Like he still has some stuff going on there where I felt like it took him a long time to get to the point where he wasn't incremental anymore. When he started talking about we're integrating into a burning house, that was pretty late. That was kind of far down the journey. All the way up until then, we were marching and overcoming, and whatever. Anyways, I don't mean to be.
You sure you left you said you evolved. You just slid right back down the mountain.
This is important, and this is why I also think that we all should be writing. We all should be writing. Why? Because, and I love what you said, this library of Black thought that we inherit, that we embody the totality of. Booker T. Washington, do you know that there are 16 official biographies written about Booker T. Washington? Two of them are Pulitzer Prize winning biographies. What does that tell you? That tells you that this man lived a big life. That tells you that he did a lot. There's a lot to be said. So to reduce any of these folks down to a bunch of sound bites, which unfortunately is like rampant right now, that's not only harmful, that's disrespectful. And it doesn't allow us to have the complexity in our analysis of where we're going and what we got to do. Because Ish, Chris, Sharif, me, y'all listening, if you think about like the Black freedom struggle as a marathon and as a relay, we got the baton. It's our turn. And without understanding what just got passed along to us in our joint, what we got to do, then we're running an ignorant race. But we also
running an ignorant race.
We got to be able to.
Me too.
Yeah,
scary
we're running
scary.
harder in that race than others too.
Exactly. So we need to be reading these catalogs. You could read the source documents. We should be students of our history, and also not just throwing figures away.
Yeah.
I don't throw Booker T. Washington away. I don't throw Dubois away. I'm not throwing Ida B. Wells away. But what we can do is be lifelong students of the Black radical tradition, understand where the tensions have always lied, and understand also then what those tensions mean for our outcomes. You talked about the 8 million Black babies in this country right now. We got serious conversations that need to be ongoing about how are we going to shore up the educational bag for our kids, because public school systems is a wrap. It's a wrap. So, and the cavalry is not.
What do you mean? What do you mean about the it's a wrap on the public education part?
What I mean by that is that for a second time in United States history since the Civil War, these United States at the federal level have decided to abdicate its responsibility to deliver a fair and equitable education system
Mm-hmm.
as
Mm-hmm.
a public good and a right
Mm-hmm.
to all American children. This
Mm-hmm.
happened the first time during the fall of after the fall of Reconstruction. Okay, when the Freedmen's Bureau fell, when the Freedmen's school system was wiped away. Okay, and when the federal government said we will allow states to choose how they deal with their Black citizens. That was the first time. The second time was when this occupier came into office for his second regime and immediately dismantled the Department of Education, which is unraveling before our eyes. What's different about this time is before, it was just available to Black kids, Indigenous kids, okay? Now it's available to all Americans. This, again, abdication. So that's what I mean by it's a wrap for the public school system. There's no more looking to the federal government to enforce some semblance of equity or to at least have an apparatus to be able to assert one's rights.
So I'm glad that you mentioned this because something that I feel like a crazy person every time I think about it, but the outlawing of Black texts,
Mm.
the outlawing of Black scholars, the removal of Black scholarship out of mainstream systems on purpose, the deliberate kind of messing with African American studies AP, for example, but leaving European AP related courses untouched. The talking about things like in Texas, you have to teach both sides of the Holocaust and both sides of slavery, putting that in law, like putting that actually in law. The removal of very specific words, like in Wisconsin, outlawing the words soul murder, which comes from Dr. Love's book, outlawing that in the actual record, making it against the law to in schools even mention these words or whatever. I feel like a crazy person, and I don't understand why we're not all more vocal, alarmed, outraged, crazy, whatever about
Up
this.
in
And
arms.
it's happening right underneath us, right? And we got all these big Black organizations that like put out all kinds of annual reports and do all kinds of things right now. But we are being stripped, equity stripped of our intellectual heritage, which is my long way of getting to a question of we're going to have to educate our own. Your book, when you think about your book, how do you want this taught? And how do we get this out of adult hands and get this into young minds? Like, how do we teach what you spent 8 years learning?
There are two ways to do that. And number one is to assert the truth and the reality that uh, Black child, your mind is gold. It is the most valuable asset on this planet. And everybody recognizes that. So you must recognize it. That is your responsibility. That's one thing that I want to be taught from this book. And one thing that I want, and I want everybody who's listening to understand about Battle for the Black Mind. While I am a social scientist, I'm a sociologist, I did not write an academic book. This is a book of stories. And what I want our children to be learning from Battle for the Black Mind are the many, many stories of Black educators, school founders, youth, parents who took all that they had, their ingenuity, their skills, their resources, their labor, to build our own institutions that were just material manifestations of how we saw ourselves in the future. We built that. We built our own schools off of our freedom dreams. So that's why I tell you the story of Mary Smith Peak. Before there was a Hampton University, there was her teaching enslaved Black people, sneaking onto plantations during slavery time in Hampton, Virginia. Okay? If you imagine what Harriet Tubman did, coming back from the North, sneaking on plantations, that's what Mary Smith Peak was doing. understanding that one day her people would be free and that they were going to need this knowledge. That was going to be a part of the power toolkit. When the Civil War happens, she, like many other Black folks who were considered refugees during that time, ran to the nearest Union Army base, Fort Monroe. That's still in Hampton, Virginia right now. She sets up a freedom school under an oak tree. There on the first day, there were 5 Black people, and she's teaching them to read, write, and what she called cipher. Within 2 weeks, she's got over 60 students, adults and children, learning to read during the Civil War under this tree. Those were her freedom dreams. She didn't get to live to see the end of the Civil War and the outcome, but she knew her people would be free. She knew that they would need that. What is that oak tree today? It still stands. That is the opening of Hampton University. It's called Emancipation Oak. It is a national heritage site because that school, no matter what that white guy had in mind, when it was incorporated, he was building it on sacred, holy land, on that Black lady's tears, on her freedom dream. So it was going to be, back to what you said, won't he do it? It was going to become what it needed to become for us. But I tell these stories of the Mary McLeod Bethunes, who starts a private school with $1.15 in Daytona, Florida, where there were no public schools for Black kids. And she knocks on the doors of the other Black people who live in that community and say, hey, y'all, I'm new to town. I got a college education and I'm going to start a school. What you got? And folks said, well, I don't have no money, but I got some furniture. Or I know how to garden. We could set up a garden on this land. Or I know how to sew. And guess what? Daytona Institute for Negro Girls starts. That then grows into a co-ed institution. That elementary school then grows into a full K through 12 institution with a nursing school to boot on campus. Why? Because Black people couldn't access the white healthcare system. That school stands today as Bethune-Cookman College. Do you hear me? So these are the lessons that I want our youth to be nourished in and reminded of, story after story after story of how we did it. Because we got the muscle memory for this. We know how to do this. We got the blueprint. And it's important that we be reminded of all that we already have everything that we need, not only to survive this moment, but to thrive. Like we ain't studying none of this other stuff, but we have to build it. Nobody's coming to save us.
So yes, I think about all the work here. Sharif is building a Black teacher pipeline. Ish is very, very like much someone who's reminded me the importance of social studies. Like, I spent years talking about math and reading as if those were the only 2 subjects in the entire world, right? Like there was nothing that came after that. But this thing around, and you're a sociologist, another thing where I feel like, where is our appreciation for what our people have to say? Our Black social workers, even our Black social scientists, our Black scholars, our Black librarians, right? Like when you say we have everything that we need, we do, but it's disconnected. It's not in a coherent format. And I don't know where the big meeting is. I don't know where everybody takes place together. I do want to add one story because I love my stories.
It's the new Niagara.
I love my stories more than other people.
Well, after that, to talk about the new Niagara, that's where the big meeting is happening.
The story I want to add is Lucy Craft Laney, because Mary McLeod Bethune came out of Laney's school. Laney started the first Black kindergarten. And I like to bring the story up because it's the first charter school on record. She got a charter from the state of Georgia to actually open a school that didn't exist for kids that didn't have access to kindergarten. Kindergarten was very much a German thing, first of all. Let's just put it that way. Like America wasn't big on kindergartens yet. But for Black folks, that was really very much an innovation. She never had kids, never married. But what came out of her in all those years of her being Lucy Craft Laney was other educators. Other educators came out of her tutelage. What I want to add to this is that I want to say it was her, Mary McLeod Bethune, and 2 others actually tried to get Booker T. Washington into a private conversation because they were basically saying, you got all this money and you got all this notoriety, whatnot. First of all, you don't have no women in your, like women who are actually doing the work and educators in your ear. And second, we need money. And we need you to not be sucking up all the money. We need you to be distributing some of it to us. And I don't think they were very successful in that. So they had to be successful on their own. They had to build their own, even without people like him. And why do I tell this story? Because here's the punchline to that entire story. Lucy Laney had a school that was revered for what it did for years, and the one thing that killed it was integration. It actually went south after integration. Her school became part of like a magnet situation and whatever, and it lost its ethos and it lost a lot. Now you can still see all the stuff; it still stands. You could go see the historical record on all this stuff or whatever. I just feel like it's a little poignant that she spent all this time building something for us, by us, and put her entire life into it. And many people came through that. And again, we came to a time during the Brown era where the Black bourgeoisie thought that the entire holy grail of everything was integrating. And I don't want to oversimplify this, but there were two schools of thought that you could have excellent Black schools run by Black people and Black teachers. And there was another school of thought of that will never be superior to the school that you will have when you integrate. And we lost our Black educators, our Black schools, our Black principals out of that. 95% of Black principals actually were either demoted or fired, right, of the schools that they had built. Vanessa Siddle Walker has great work on what was lost in that. When we lost that, that was the Black education Alamo. When we lost that, we think of it in jobs and schools. No, it wasn't jobs and schools. It was knowledge. It was institutional knowledge about how you prepare Black children for the practice of freedom. I know I said a lot of different things in there, but I wanted to keep going. What you made me do is you bring up Mary McLeod Bethune, and I just want to say what comes before her, and then what comes before that, and what becomes before that, so that we have some lineage in mind. We know we come from something, like we have this long line. It's my long-winded way of saying you just made me think of a lot of things. When I think about someone like you who writes these type of books, I always have the same questions. One, I just asked you, whatnot. What are we going to do to build our own systems to teach what you learned? You invested a lot of time. People say, "Oh, she wrote a book." No, first of all, you wrote a lot of things. I just want to put this out there for everybody. If you go check the public record, she's a little bit of an overachiever here. She just like keeps writing in a variety of things. But I want us to do a better job of figuring out how we teach, especially our high schoolers, stuff that would not be available to them until college usually, right? So that's tied up in all three of y'all's work. Like all three of you have had a hand in high school. I don't know how you do, because I've always said I will only teach one grade if I ever teach, and that's kindergarten, maybe first grade, but that's it. The rest of y'all high school people, you do what you do you. But high school needs to become the new college, I think, in a lot of ways for our kids.
Yeah. I'm moved because, Chris, what you just did is what we all need to be doing as a part of our just like everyday praxis, which is telling our stories over and over again. I love that you brought up Lucy Craft Laney. I actually have a chapter called Miss Lucy in the book to tell her story, and it is so very important. So thank you for that. I'm a college professor, and I've been doing this for about 10 years now. I started off as a professor at UCLA. I'm now at Emory University, so two very different school contexts. But in my time, I've taught over 1,500 kids from across the country and around the world. And what I will say to you and to all of us on this, who are tapping into this conversation, is that I can tell you for a fact that when your Black kid gets into the college setting and gets into Dr. Brown's class on the sociology of race and ethnicity, on race and education, or racial capitalism, those are the three courses that I teach. The heartbreak that I watch year after year, it's consistent, that Black kids experience when they realize that they're just learning their history for the first time, and that tinge of anger mixed with shame when they realize, like, how come I never heard this before? How come I how come I never was taught that? I think you're hitting on something that's so very important, and I'm perplexed. Like, what are y'all learning in not even just high school, elementary school up, to the point where when I'm introducing concepts or histories that I'm thinking that my students are taking for granted, especially my Black students, they have no idea. And I'm looking at the school system, the K through 12 school system, but also I'm looking at the parents, and I'm looking at the support system around the group of elephants. If you think of us as a herd of elephants who surround a child and agree that these are the things that we want to make sure to nourish our kids with, our culture, our history, our this and that. How has it become lost upon us that it is our responsibility to make sure that our kids are getting that, whether or not the school is doing it? So I don't want to see your kid stop thinking that sending your kids to private white schools where they're going to be the only one or two just because it's well resourced, just because it's rich, just because they got these excellent statistics about placement. Let me tell you that your kid is hurting. Your kid is being psychologically terrorized in those contexts, and they get to college and have to unlearn and process so much of that, and they are hurting. And there's Black academics, we represent 4% of the professoriate. It's likely that your kid, I might be their only Black professor their whole time going through an Emory or their whole time going through a UCLA. So I'm there to do my job and to love on our kids. But there's something to be said, Chris, to what you said about this lineage. We need a lineage model of education that really thinks about what is an appropriate curricula, official and informal, for Black children, all through and through, that they should be getting this from kindergarten up. Where are our freedom schools? Where are those weekend schools that are supplementing that knowledge? Where are those programs that are making sure that we're doing it? And where are the elders, whether they be parents, aunties, grandparents, or whatever, that are committed to getting the kids there? We're gonna prioritize this. This is not going to be a nice to have or a one-off. It's a part of our socialization and acculturation, because kids need the psychological fortitude as well as the skills, the reading, writing, and arithmetic necessary for them to be able to compete in this global society. And I'm here to tell you for a fact, we in danger, girl. Your kids are not okay, especially those who have been socialized through these hyper white spaces and been, and suddenly have a very rude awakening when that bubble gets burst.
Wow. This has been so powerful. And I appreciate you for taking the time to be with us today and to spread this knowledge for people listening. The Battle for the Black Mind by Dr. Brown is widely available to you right now. And when our people write books, we buy books. So I want to just make sure that we push this. Where's your favorite place for people to get the book?
Independent Black-owned bookstores. So wherever you are, go to the store, walk around, put your body in that place, buy those books. And I will tell you that we Black authors, and I'm talking about all my mutuals out there, we don't get to keep doing what we do unless y'all buy the books.
Mm-hmm.
And buying the books, it also matters where you get them from. So if you can, local Black-owned bookstores, they report to the New York Times bestseller list, the report to the sales list. And that signals to the publishing industry that Black people buy Black books, because there is a very real and nasty idea out there in the industry that Black people don't buy Black books.
And it's so crazy. And I want to take host privilege at the end here. Number one, to say if you're one of those people who says that you can't afford the book, God bless you. Go to the library near you and demand that they have multiple copies. Actually, this is something people underutilize. Libraries will buy copies of books if you request them to get them. But the thing that you want to do to turn the needle up a little bit is request 4 copies. Make sure that they get more than 1 copy, so that there's not a waiting list for whatever. So if you can't afford the book, if you can afford the book, get it from Black-owned bookstores, independent. If you say that you can't afford it, make sure that your library has multiple copies. Tell them to order, and there's usually a request form that you can put in to make that happen. The other thing that Dr. Brown just said that resonates with something I wrote 2 weeks ago: aunties, uncles, grandparents, guardians, friends of family, friends of kids or whatnot. Make sure that every child that is in your proximity has in their house a little library that they can pull from for all ages and stages of their life, not just for young people's books, not just adolescent, whatever. And this is something that aunties, uncles, or whatever's with disposable income. And I know my aunties saved my life in many ways. So aunties are like, they make the world go round, but uncles do too. Make sure that when someone in your family is having a baby, or has the baby, or has a kindergartner, or a 3rd grade or 4th grade or whatnot, that you just make sure you're silently making sure that their home library is representative of what a person needs to learn from birth to adulthood. And this could be one of those books. The Battle for the Black Mind could be on the bookshelf. When we think about a Black canon, what do we want? Like, books are expensive. So if I had you buy the entire canon, you probably couldn't do it by yourself as a parent struggling in this world. But with aunties and uncles and grandparents and birthdays and whatever, you can slyly start the revolution. The revolution will be literate, and it will start with you buying these books and put them into the hands and the houses of your family members. Any other last words from y'all?
I just want to say thank you. Appreciate you being on. I appreciate you making everywhere. We always say everywhere is a classroom, and you embody that. Keep teaching, keep fighting. And there's this cognitive dissonance even amongst our own people. And when you talk about the psychological fortitude, if you're socialized and seeped as in anti-Blackness, not only do you inherit some of that, you also inherit a rage because it's anti-human, right? Like, even if you don't have the words for it, something. This is why even, so many of our elementary and middle school kids are, and students, period, rebel within school, even before they have the language, because they know I'm not being treated as a full human being, as a full citizen in this school or whatever. And sometimes they don't have the words and the understanding behind it. And so it comes out at rage, it comes out at lashing. It comes out of anti-Blackness again, even amongst our own. And so this is why this education, enlightenment, which is really investment, and I loved how you spoke about everything that was in the past was really their version of Afrofuturism for us to take the baton today. So how are we thinking about Afrofuturism for our great grandkids? And that's what we tell our students in Freedom School. Yes, the kid in front of you, but you're really affecting that first grader's grandchild. Have that level of vision as you're teaching, as you're developing your lesson plans, as you're choosing the material to invest them in. So just again, thank you. Looking forward to continued engagement and just deep appreciation, admiration, for your work and the legacy of enlightened minds that you're bringing.
Yeah, and I definitely want to co-sign everything Sharif just said, and definitely I'm like soaking it in. Like, every time you were talking, I was like, oh, wow, that point. But it's like you were teaching me at the same time. And that's what it's all about, like this level of conversation. And I love how you're illuminating how that's important through storytelling. And that brings in our children in the conversation. That brings in the community in the conversation that we need to have, because the battle for the Black mind is still happening. And hopefully part 2, we can discuss what you just started wading the waters with, and that is the conversation of even the psychological fortitude, right, that children even need being like so many of our children go to suburban schools, majority, white institutions. And then what does that produce, right? What type of thing that, parents who do have their children in those situations, what do they need to prepare them? Because that is a different type of preparation if your child's going to be in that type of situation. So I would love to have that conversation, and how it even relates to the debates of old about what is and how do we use education to get liberation, but then what liberation is at the end. What are you trying to achieve by doing that? I think I want to get into that conversation. So
yeah. And one other thing, this whole conversation reminded me of what Chris used to talk about a decade ago with the Battle of Black Mind. It just connected for me. Chris used to say, the Black students were the new cotton, and people were just choosing like how they were going to profit off of it. And when I think about this battle, I'm like, man, that's here it is playing out again, and the baton's in our hand. Like, we better not F it up, Yeah. It's sobering.
And hopefully you will come back again, because you opened up like several areas of you opened up several classrooms here.
Already a part of the team. I'm like, this.
Yes.
I really, really enjoyed the conversation. I just want to thank you all from the bottom of my heart. The work that you do is vital. And I mean, I can't tell you how big my heart is right now seeing 3 Black men taking up this space, leading the charge with these conversations. We need you. We love you. A deep, deep appreciation, and thank you for having me in your space.
Appreciate you so much. Everybody, this has been another episode of Freedom Friday, and you're still not free, but hopefully you are freer after this hour with the gang, and we hope that you come back next week. When you see this, though, share this out with your friends, your family, and others who you think would be interested in the content. That's how we are successful, is when you share these shows with others. As always, we appreciate you, and we will see you on the next Freedom Friday.